This is going to be a disaster. We're going to be counting ballots for the next 2 years. And I don't want to end up in the Supreme Court, and I don't want to go back to Congress either. Even though we have an advantage if we go back to Congress. We actually have an advantage. Oh, they're going to be thrilled to hear that.
All right, so that was Donald Trump referring to the rare possibility that the 2020 election might head to the House of Representatives if there's a tie in the Electoral College, making a point that today's Speaker Nancy Pelosi basically confirmed that Republicans hold the edge on that kind of vote, even though Democrats hold the majority of representatives in the House. It's because the Constitution says that vote for president is determined by state delegations in the House, not individual lawmakers. And right now, Republicans represent the majority of House members from 26 states. Pelosi sending out a red alert saying this is yet another reason for Democrats to pick up seats in the House in November. Joining me now is former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal. Neil, good to talk to you again, my friend. Lots of people were surprised by this because a lot of people thought it was based on the representation or the composition, if you will, of the House of Representatives. Isn't it weird, though, how this vote would happen? Explain that to our viewers.
It is weird, and it is so remarkable that we're talking about this and all these other scenarios are usually unthinkable. And it's only thinkable now because of one fundamental thing, which is Donald Trump doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about rules. He doesn't care about institutions. He cares only for himself. And so there's a fear that if the election happens in November, he won't concede. And he's in fact intimated that, including in those clips that you were just playing. I mean, normal presidents concede, starting in 1896, that's when the modern concession begins with William Jennings Bryant, when he sent a telegram conceding. And that concession is not just about grace. It's a profound act of democracy. It's about letting the country move on. So what Trump is now talking about is this 12th Amendment gambit, which lays down the rules if there are not 270 clear electoral votes. And at that point, then you have each state delegation conducting an internal election to decide the candidate. And every state gets the same amount. Wyoming has about 600,000 people. They get the same vote in this as California, which has 70 times the population. So Trump's right in one sense that the math may favor him a bit in this calculus. But boy, if that's the way a president wins, you have to really worry that it would tear the country apart because it's profoundly anti-democratic. That's why we've not had that amendment kicked in.
Yeah, I was going to say, and let's not forget that he is also a president who lost the popular vote by 3 million votes back in 2016. So we can even see a similar scenario play out this time around. Let me switch gears for a moment, Neil. I want to talk to you about the Supreme Court. What do you think as the confirmation process of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, gets underway for the Supreme Court? What do you think the focus should be for Democrats as they begin to question her?
I think the focus has to be the transformational nature of this appointment and this kind of rush to jam her through because the president's afraid he's going to lose in November. I mean, it's only been 10 days since Justice Ginsburg passed away and we lost this great giant in the law. And I think the Republicans are pretty clear in saying they want to rush her on the court because they want her there because of the Affordable Care Act and a vote to possibly strike it down. They want her there to rule against Roe versus Wade. Republican senators like Josh Hawley have said they won't even bother even listening to someone or confirming someone who's not adamantly against Roe versus Wade, and he and others are fine with her. So I think, the focus, this is different than, Justice Kavanaugh replacing Justice Kennedy or Justice Gorsuch replacing Justice Scalia. Those didn't change the matrix of the court fundamentally. Here you've got one of the greatest and most powerful liberal justices, greatest thinkers, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, being replaced by someone who the Republicans themselves admit is deeply conservative. So I think that's where the debate is going to be. It's not going to be, is she brilliant? Is she nice? It's all that kind of stuff. She is those things. That's not where the relevant question in the hearings will be.
If the math goes through as planned, she will get confirmed. Is there any effort, or should there be an effort to try to get her to commit to recusing herself on issues involving this election if, in fact, it somehow ends up at the Supreme Court and she is confirmed?
I mean, recusals are done by independent individual justices. That, trying to extort something like that is going to go nowhere. So I don't see that as plausible. But I do think that the fact that the president has been going around saying in campaign rallies he needs her on the court because there may be an election dispute is really one of the most corrosive things I've ever heard a president say about our United States Supreme Court. Those justices shouldn't be tarnished by Donald Trump's disrespect for the law and disrespect for the court. That's not the way our justices operate. And I find it, reprehensible that he'd say something like that.
Obviously, the way this is all playing out, the way Republicans are ramming this nomination through, as you outlined, in such a short period of time, has a lot of people talking about how and whether or not there should be a reformation of the Supreme Court. It's certainly something Democrats are calling for, including possibly term limits for the justices, even expanding the court from its current format of 9 justices. What's your view on all of that?
Well, there's 2 different proposals kicking around. One is an 18-year term for justices, which I think is a great idea. It's kind of weird the way that there have been imbalances. Of the last 18 justices, 14 appointed by Republican presidents. And Trump wants to make it 15 of 19. And you have this kind of macabre spectacle of justices hanging on for a long period of time in order to get a president who, of the same political party, who appointed them to be elected or something like that. It's just, I don't think it's a good way to run things. And then the other proposal kicking around is the idea of increasing the size of the Supreme Court, which I think is virtually inevitable if the Republicans and President Trump do go and install Amy Coney Barrett as a justice on the Supreme Court. I mean, it is so in fundamental tension with what they said in 2016 and paired up against the fact that they took that seat in 2016, I think it'll be, I think that the Supreme Court will have 11, 13, or 15 justices on it as a result of what the Republicans are doing and the monkey games they're playing with our most treasured institution, the Supreme Court. And I hate to see that, but I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would share your assessment. Neil Katyal, thank you so much for giving us your perspective. As always, appreciate it. And of course, for more of Neil's insight on all this, go to msnbc.com/opening arguments.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.